This
Everybody
conference will
into
now be recorded.
tonight's webinar with Tom Jordan, registered dietitian. We are going to be talking about all things nutrition as it pertains to running. And a little bit of background, I have worked with Tom or known Tom for, Tom, it's hard to believe, since 2012, so for 7 years. And Tom has worked with a lot of my clients and has a great deal of experience in working with endurance athletes, but really working with people of all ages and fitness and ability levels. And every year, we've done this webinar for the past, I want to say 4 years. Every summer, I should say, the nutrition webinar is the most heavily attended and the most interactive. So I'm really looking forward to a engaging conversation. And Tom obviously has a wealth of knowledge and experience in this field. Tom, a little bit of feedback for you. Excuse me. We have individuals that are on this webinar tonight and who will be listening to the recording that are training really for a multitude of races: the Chicago Marathon, the New York City Marathon, the Berlin Marathon, the Philadelphia Rock and Roll Half Marathon, the San Francisco Giant Race, not to mention a few others. So we have people that are doing races from the 5K all the way up to the marathon, with probably the majority of the athletes training for a fall marathon. So with that said, Tom, I will hand the keys over to you and let you get going.
All right, awesome. So I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So I kind of have this broken down. Like, obviously, we're going to focus on nutrition and directed at people who are going to be, whether it's a half marathon, marathon, people are going to be on the course for a significant amount of time. But I think this information is going to apply to anybody, whether they're doing 5K through, like being on the course for 6 hours or whatever it is. So, and I kind of have it set up to where we'll do like a basic review of nutrition, like what we're thinking about when we're looking at the different types of food and macronutrients like carbohydrates and protein, and then dial into like some specifics on, okay, how do we apply that to pre-race, post-workout, stuff like that. But I think we'll kind of hit more bullet points along the way, and I would encourage you guys to chime in if you do have questions, because I'd rather glaze over a topic and have people ask 20 questions than have me try to hammer out 20 different things about the topic. So definitely want to encourage you guys to chime in as we go. That works. So I'm good. I'm on my phone. So obviously, we start right from the top. So we start with carbohydrates. That's definitely a big topic with marathon runners, of course, because that's really, when you're on the course for that long, that's really your limiting factor. If we are, as you start to run, the faster you run, the more carbohydrates you burn. So you burn a higher percentage of carbohydrates. If you're sprinting, you're almost 100% carbohydrates. If you're walking, you're burning maybe 10 or 15% carbohydrates, a lot less. Carbohydrates are very efficient fuel, but the problem is we can only store so much. We have very limited store. So that's the game when it comes to a marathon, is we have to run slow enough to where we can conserve carbohydrates. So and not tap into our carbohydrate stores. So it's going to be a big topic when we look at endurance, any kind of endurance sport. Basics on carbohydrates. We obviously, in general, we want to be leaning more toward the right side of this screen. So more complex carbohydrates that are digested a little bit more slowly. But we will kind of circle back to the simple carbs. Simple carbs are going to be more something that's it's very easy to digest. So we can break it down very quickly. The simplest of all carbohydrates, of course, is going to be sugar, which when we talk about healthy eating, we tend to stay away from sugar. But we'll talk about how that can be useful when it's coming to when we're applying it to our training diet. And this was I love this graph. I use this graph all the time. Basically, you're looking at muscle glycogen level. So that's just a fancy way of saying how much carbs are stored in your muscle. on the left side of the chart, you see that this is basically a research study where they took oh, you can just go in the bed stuff. Yeah, if you want. Is that cool? I'll be out there in a minute. I'm right over here. Yep. I'm sorry. This is a research study where they basically took college athletes and ran them through soccer practice for 2 hours, and their carbohydrate levels were depleted. They put one group on a high carbohydrate diet, and that's the group in the red, and another group on a low carbohydrate diet, that's the group in the blue. So day one, when you see that graph drop, everybody's glycogen levels are going down because they're tapping into their carb stores. If they eat a high carbohydrate diet, you can see that it comes back up to normal over 24 hours. Low carbohydrate diet, it's not really moving much. Day two, let's go run them for another 2-hour practice, and then day three, you can see by day three they're pretty much tanked. So this is just a good indication of, anybody who comes up with an idea that a marathon runner should be on a low carbohydrate diet. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because we need to keep our glycogen levels high. I think it gets way over encouraged sometimes. I don't think we need that many carbohydrates, so we shouldn't be just, if we're training for a marathon, just going out eating bowls of pasta and getting crazy with carbohydrates either, though. So as far as timing goes, the most important thing to think about, I think, with I would say across the board with nutrition, with marathon training, is post-workout. I know everybody wants to talk about during workouts, before workouts, what do I eat? But the whole point of a workout is to improve and get better, right? So recovery, you're actually going to enhance your recovery with carbohydrates post-workout. Carbohydrates get a bad rap because they really stimulate insulin levels, which causes us to store nutrients. And if you're sitting on the couch at 10 o'clock at night, you don't want to be storing nutrients because you're going to be storing it as fat. But post-workout, that insulin spike is actually very beneficial because it'll stimulate recovery. So post-workout carbs are going to be very important. During workout, when we saw those glycogen levels, had we given those athletes some carbohydrates during their workout, then that line would not have dropped as steeply, because that would have curtailed some of that drop in burning muscle glycogen, because we'd be able to utilize that carbohydrates that we're taking in during the run. And then pre-workout, kind of same idea. Pre-workout, you're looking at topping off glycogen stores before you head out to the run. Protein obviously is going to be very important. Think about basically our rebuilding muscle. So if running is very, very catabolic, meaning it's breaking down. We're breaking down muscle tissue, and especially endurance running, we're breaking down a lot of muscle tissue. So recovery from workouts is very important. We use amino acids to rebuild these muscles. We get amino acids from protein. So protein's going to be coming from our meat, dairy, eggs, things like that. We'll also talk about like whey protein as possibly supplementing our protein levels. But obviously, so protein is going to be key when it comes to recovery. But then we also are going to need it spaced out throughout the day as well. So just having a 16-ounce steak 2 hours after a run for recovery isn't really going to do the job as well as maybe 3 or 4 small doses of protein throughout the day. Number of different functions. I think we'll put immune function number one, because that is a thing that we'll see when people start to really increase their mileage and race and marathons and stuff. That just the incidence of getting colds or getting sick tends to go up, because it's such a debilitating thing, like if being out on the course for 3 hours, doing 3 hour training runs, things like that. So protein, making sure we're getting enough protein in our diet is going to be important for immune function. Obviously, we talked about the repairing damaged muscle tissues, and also I think throughout the day too, if you consume protein with a meal, it tends to take longer to digest, which ends up stabilizing your blood sugar levels. And sometimes people will say they'll think that protein gives you energy. It doesn't really essentially give you energy to burn, but if your blood sugar levels are more stabilized throughout the day, you tend to have more energy and more balanced blood sugars throughout the day as well. And I would say there's maybe like 3 or 4 things where I would say these are topics that we definitely need to hit. I would say this is one, that 30-gram protein rule. When you look at like how much muscle tissue we're able to generate after a meal. So in response to a meal, we will it'll stimulate muscle building, basically anabolic response. 10 grams is obviously better than 0. 20 grams is better than 10. But we start to like about 30 grams is where you kind of plateau. So like you're optimizing muscle recovery with about 30 grams of protein. Like 40 might be a little bit higher, but I always tell athletes that I would much rather see you get 30 grams of protein 5 times a day than 50 grams of protein 3 times a day, because you get about the same from 30 that you do 50. So I'd rather see 30 more frequently. But also on the other side of that is if we're only getting 10 grams of protein post-workout, we always encourage people to get at least 30 grams of protein post-workout. And would probably also use that same thing for a meal as well. I think do want to just touch on fat real quick. I think a lot of times fat is still it's much better. I think we're getting a lot more information about the benefits of fat than it has been in previous years. I think fat's always been looked at as a negative, and we want to try a low-fat diet. And especially as a marathon runner, I'm trying to um, eat more carbs because I know that I need carbohydrates. So I definitely want to make sure that people are encouraged to consume fat. And if you think about it, like if you are on a little bit higher fat diet, if we pull the carbohydrates down a little bit and we're focusing on healthy fats, you end up getting good at burning fat. And the philosophy there is if you can train your body to burn fat more effectively, then on the marathon course, that's a huge benefit because you're able to utilize fat as a fuel better than you would had you been on just a strictly high carbohydrate diet. Um, I think I have a note on here about timing with fat too. But basically with fat, think about fat as a very slow nutrient. Like it takes a long time to dissolve. And if you think about like a um, a heavy meal, like Thanksgiving dinner, um, you're kind of sluggish afterwards, and really that's because fat sits in the stomach for a long time, which pre-workout is definitely not a good thing. So we would want to try to avoid or reduce fat a little bit pre-workout. We obviously definitely don't want fat during a workout. It serves very little purpose. Post-workout, we're trying to kind of rush nutrients to the cells, so for recovery. So that window of like an hour before the workout until 2 hours after, we're probably looking at a little bit lower fat. But then the rest of the day, you do want like slow, slow to digest. So I would encourage a little bit higher fat intake the rest of the day. And if we go to the next slide, um, we'll expand on that a little bit. Good fat, bad fat. I'm not a huge fan of good and bad when it comes to food. I would probably label this maybe healthier and less healthy. But the kind of the processed fats, trans fats especially, are very counterproductive to health, and you could trace this to most chronic disease processes are accelerated by these fats on the right. So the incidence of heart disease, for sure, like dramatic increases in heart disease, diabetes, stroke, even cancer rates, because all of the bad fats, typically processed fats, trans fats, are super hard to break down, and they also promote inflammation in the body. So which accelerates the rate of chronic disease. Versus fats on the left, where tend to, we know that olive oil gets a good rap. Fish oil, really, essentially, is the most anti-inflammatory. That's very high in omega-3s. Walnut oil is a good one. But some of these more natural fats are going to be better at decreasing inflammation. So this is probably promoting or hurting our health is the type of fat we're consuming. And I see a question about vegetable oil. It depends on what kind of vegetable oil. I think what we're looking for is like an unprocessed oil. So olive oil, and even with canola oil. So canola oil, the processed one, and I guess what I would lead you towards is a glass bottle. So if you're buying a big bottle of canola oil and it's in a plastic bottle, that's a processed oil that's been processed at a high heat, and it can probably withstand a pretty considerable amount of heat. So you could heat that up to 475 degrees and put it in a deep fat fryer, and it's not even going to break down. The problem with that is that's wonderful for being able to cook food super, super fast and have it be really, really tasty. But if you can't break down a fat at 475 degrees, your body also has a difficulty breaking it down. So anything that's fried, deep fried, is going to tend to be some of those bad fats that are going to promote inflammation. And in general, like vegetable oil, if it just is like corn oil or vegetable oil, those tend to be the processed oils. But if we're looking at you can get canola oil that's organic expeller pressed, and that's been processed at a low heat, and that's still going to be high in omega-3. So olive oil, canola oil, coconut oil. I think avocado oil is also another one that can withstand a pretty decent amount of heat. I really like walnut oil because there's not a whole lot of it's relatively tasteless, and it can still withstand a pretty decent amount of heat when cooking, but it's still high in omega-3s. And that would be one note on olive oil. I know olive oil is pretty heavily used, but we want to try to not use olive oil when we're frying foods or cooking at high heat, because olive oil does break down at a pretty low temperature. So you're actually damaging the olive oil, and it's less healthy if it's past its smoke point, which is like 210 degrees. So I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there with fats, and definitely, if we want to circle back and go into that a little bit deeper, we definitely can. But for now, we'll move on to the most essential nutrient. You can go 3 days, without food and essentially be fine. I mean, you'll be hungry, a little irritable, but we can last weeks without food. We have enough calories stored up to where we can go a really, really long time without food if we had to. We can go about maybe 36 hours without water. So water is going to be very important. It's also, when it comes to exercise, is probably the quickest one that can impair performance. And it's also really overlooked too. I don't know if anybody's seen the documentary on the 2-hour marathon where they were training to try to beat 2 hours. But they were talking about one of the athletes, and he's like one of the best marathon runners in the world. But he was 3 or 4 minutes behind the other guys, And the reason they brought him into the group is because they thought one of the reasons his performance was so poor. When they say so poor, his best was like 209 or something like that. Um, but they thought he was capable of a 202, which is drastically, incredibly huge gap between a 209 and a 202. But they said because in most of his races, they think that he was getting dehydrated. And it's like, this is one of the best marathoners in the world and is still overlooking hydration. So I think um, it's definitely overlooked, and it does impair performance pretty quickly, like a 1% loss in fluid and body weight. So that means for a 200-pound person, losing 2 pounds of fluid can significantly impair performance, which 2 pounds of fluid sounds like a lot. But I definitely would encourage you to like weigh in, especially when you get into hot, the warmer months, weigh in before your workout and then after, and kind of get a gauge, because I know like I'm a very, very heavy sweater, so I do sweat quite a bit. But I did have a day where I was on a long run, forgot my water bottle. It was a hot day, and I think it was down 13 pounds, and it wasn't that long of a run either. It was like an hour 40 maybe, and I lost 13 pounds in less than 2 hours. So it's definitely possible to lose quite a very high percentage of fluid if we're not hydrating. Number of benefits, making sure that we're staying hydrated. I don't think I need to really sell that, but there's a lot of things that directly performance related, also health related, injury prevention related, detoxification, on and on and on. A couple things to just think about, like I would say, one thing to think about: if you get thirsty, it's definitely too late. Like you get dehydrated long before the sensation of thirst occurs. So if you're thirsty, you definitely know that you're behind the curve, and this increases as we age. So a 20-year-old has a little bit quicker thirst mechanism than a 30-year-old, 40, 50 and on. So thirst is, definitely, and the takeaway point here is we're not going to wait until we get thirsty. The whole concept of, well, if I get thirsty, I'll drink water. Definitely don't wait until we get to that point. On from there, like muscle cramping and weakness and decreased performance, any undue fatigue or lightheadedness means that we're probably getting pretty significantly dehydrated at that point. So the strategy. So what do we need to be looking at here? One thing to think about for training runs, and especially marathon day or race day, is it takes about 90 minutes for water to kind of clear our system. So my strategy, and I learned this the hard way. Like my first marathon, I knew I needed to be drinking water, so I'm chugging water. I'm drinking Gatorade beforehand. I'm super hydrated at the start of the race. Start the race, I'm very excited to go. And then at the 2-mile mark, I had to like dive off of the course to find a porta john because I had to go to the bathroom so bad at 15 minutes into the race. So I've learned since then, obviously, and kind of changed my strategy. And now I will push fluids quite a bit in the morning, but I basically really cut things off about 90 minutes out. So I'll drink a full 32-ounce Gatorade and maybe a 16-ounce bottle of water 2 hours out, because then I know that 90 minutes later, any extra fluid that I've had, I'm going to be able to go to the bathroom and not have to stop while I'm on the race course. But with training runs, another thing to think about is if it's over 60 minutes, that's usually my rule, where I probably am looking at a carbohydrate beverage, because it's going to sustain blood sugars a little bit more. actually improves recovery because you're not breaking down as much muscle. If it's less than 60 minutes, water is totally fine. So if you have access to water, or you can leave a water bottle on the course, that's great. If you need to do a 60-minute run without water, as long as you're hydrating before and after, that's okay. But definitely try to be consuming water all the time, especially on runs. Before a run, an hour to two before, we want to try to top off fluids with two cups of water. And then during the run, it really depends on your level of sweat. So 15 ounces or a cup of water every 15 minutes might be way too much for some people, and it might be way too little for other people. And the way we figure that out is weighing in before and after. Like if you're consistently losing 2 or 3 pounds during a run, that's water that you're losing. So we need to up our fluid intake. We should be close to the same weight post workout as we were going into it. And then just a very general rule of thumb is the color, urine color should be relatively pale or clear. If it's dark, that means that's a good indication that you're dehydrated. So big picture tips, a couple just keynotes here. We definitely want to be eating regularly. So every 3 to 4 hours. I know that this intermittent fasting has kind of come into popularity. Definitely not something I would recommend for a marathon runner. Really not something I would recommend for a dieter or somebody that's trying to reduce weight either. But definitely want to make sure that we're getting your cells nutrients frequently throughout the day. So eating every 3 to 4 hours. Balancing our meals out so we're not focusing on just protein or just fat or just carbohydrates. Each of them has a benefit. So if you try to eat more of one, you're essentially just eating less of another. So balanced macronutrient intake always wins. In general, we're looking for higher fiber foods that are going to be dissolved more slowly. If you think about a can of soda, if we just slam a can of soda, it's 50 grams of sugar. You have about 30 minutes to deal with that. So basically, you're either going to use it as fuel, or you're going to store it as fat. If you had the same 50 grams of carbohydrates in a very low glycemic meal, so like a sweet potato with some protein and fat, now you have your cells have 3 or 4 hours to use that. So you got an extended period of time to where you can utilize those carbohydrates and you're not just turning it into fat. So whole grains, high fiber foods, and then definitely anything as you start to get closer to the marathon, your marathon strategy, like your nutrition strategy, needs to be something that you tried beforehand. So your long runs are essentially simulations for your marathon. Obviously for the training effect and the amount of stress and time you're going to have to be on the course, but also we need to be each week kind of prepping and trying what we're thinking we're going to be doing on race day in the days leading up to the long runs as well. So pre-race meal, one thing to think about with the race, and I have I've ran 15 marathons, so I have a lot of failure or bad decision stories I can draw from. And one of them would have been when I think I wanted to really get some high carbohydrates in, and I think we ended up at like a taco place, and I guess this sounds really dumb as I go back through it, but I ended up at a taco place, and I think I got like a bean burrito or something, and because beans are very high in carbs, right? And as you would guess, they are very high in carbs, but they're also very high in fiber. And so during the race, it ended up being not one of my more pleasant races, I guess you could say. But I always for race day, we're looking for high carbohydrate. This is the one time I would tell somebody that I would want them to go on more of a lower fiber, like I call it low residue. So we're consuming a lot of carbs in the 2 or 3 days leading up to the marathon. But the day before the marathon is when we kind of switch to lower residue, meaning lower fiber foods. So that is the one day I would tell you I'd rather see you having white bread than wheat bread. I would rather, maybe juice. I really see very little use for juice. It's just basically concentrated sugar. But the day before a marathon, I could see doing juice for your carbohydrates, because there's really not anything else there. It's basically just sugar and water. I got a picture of the buckwheat pancakes there. That's the day before the marathon. I might do just regular, plain, just the white, the regular white pancakes. We do want to make sure that we're getting some fluids in. Also avoid alcohol. Alcohol dehydrates you, so the day before the race, or we probably want to abstain from alcohol. Quick note on carb loading. So this is actually like the Finnish and Swedish athletes in the 70s actually figured out that what they did was they had a super low carbohydrate diet for like 3 or 4 days, and then they would do a super high carbohydrate diet for 3 or 4 days. And when you see that red line coming back, basically what they were doing was they were hyper compensating. So they were actually banking additional glycogen from that strategy, and which is important, because then when the other athletes were running out of glycogen, they still had some left. So that's when carbohydrate loading got popular for endurance events. The problem is going on a super low carbohydrate diet for 3 days is uncomfortable. You're very fatigued, and that's not something I want to be. 4 days before a marathon, I don't want to be fatigued, because then I'm going to start questioning it, and there's a mental effect to that too. So, and then going on a super high carbohydrate diet then makes you a little bit bloated. So you might be your digestive system might not be used to it. What we've found is that you can kind of go on a modified version of this. You don't have to be that extreme, and you'll get most of the benefit. So my recommendation for carbohydrate loading is definitely not the night before. I know a lot of times people will think, oh, I'm going to load up on carbs at dinner the night before the marathon. If you're going to do it effectively, it's a 3-day process. So you would, if the race is on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we might, I would say so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Tuesday, Wednesday would be a little bit lower carbohydrate. Thursday, we would do kind of our walk through, like last maybe solid run, and then as soon as that's over, then I would flip to high carbohydrate. So really pushing the carbohydrates from Thursday morning throughout the day, Thursday, all day Friday, all day Saturday. So you have about 3 days to start banking some carbohydrates and storing some additional carbs for the race. During the marathon, it's simple, and that's a good way to put it. The more simple you can get, the better. So you do not want to be, and obviously you wouldn't want to have steak and potatoes bouncing around in your stomach while you're running. The more and the simplest form of fuel is sugar. So I remember somebody a long time ago saying, oh man, Gatorade's just water, sugar, and salt. And as I've learned more about nutrition, I'm like, well, when you're running, you need water, sugar to conserve glycogen, and sodium is very effective. It's we try to stay away from salt and sodium as much as we can with normal nutrition, but during a race, you're losing sodium from sweat, and if you can get sodium in the fluid, we tend to retain more. So you're retaining more of the water too. So, and just number of studies, they've done hundreds and hundreds of studies. It always circles back to, basically, to keep it simple, like the concentration of Gatorade is essentially what we're looking for. about 15 grams of carbohydrates per cup. So 1 cup of water, 15 grams of carbohydrates, and then maybe a little higher sodium than what a normal Gatorade has, like about 200 milligrams of sodium in a cup of water is probably the optimal. Gatorade, I believe, has 100 milligrams, which is still a good amount. If you were looking at it as a health beverage, like somebody just drinking Gatorade at their desk, that would be a terrible option because they really do not need sugar and salt while they're at work or sedentary. But when we're active, that's really what we're looking for. The other nice benefit about it is that concentration of solute in the fluid is the same concentration as our blood. Basically, it's 350 millimoles of solute per cup. And hopefully nobody wrote that down because that's completely useless information. But basically, it's the same concentration as blood, which makes it very easy for the fluid to pass through the stomach lining and get into our bloodstream. I know one quick note. I know a lot of people do have an issue with Gatorade, whether it's the sweetness or tolerance for it too. There's a lot of different sugars that we can use. So I would just try some of the other sports beverages that are out there, whether you're mixing powders that you're mixing yourself, and give it a shot. But because it's depending on the enzymes that we have to break sugars down, sometimes some people don't do as well with Gatorade. Recovery meals, remember, this to me is just such a essential component. The post-workout meal to me is the key to sports nutrition. I feel like, and what they've found through studies is that if you give somebody some carbohydrates and protein right afterwards, right after a meal, it works significantly better than if you give them that same exact meal 4 hours after the workout. So we have this metabolic window of about 90 minutes to 2 hours following exercise where we definitely want to get a meal in. And just to jump back to the question quick about during race or during workout hydration. The three things we're looking at in a sports beverage. One is obviously the fluid. Two is the carbohydrate. So the carbohydrate in the fluid is going to help you prevent that drop in glycogen. So it can extend endurance performance. And then number three is we want some sodium in the fluid. So the electrolyte pill is definitely going to give you the sodium. If you're putting it in your water, you get the fluid. But the downside of the electrolyte pill is it doesn't have any carbohydrates. So there's not a lot of benefit to that. I think if you're looking at if somebody says, okay, I'm not going to do Gatorade, should I do water or the electrolyte solution? I would say, well, definitely the electrolyte solution. But if it was electrolyte tab versus Gatorade, it's no contest. I think recovery meal. So key components here, we're looking for carbohydrates and with a little bit of protein. So I wouldn't want a lot of fat involved with this because and the only reason is because fat's just going to slow down digestion. It's going to take longer to get past the stomach and digest it into the muscle. So I would tend to go more for a carbohydrate meal with some chicken or some kind of protein. I think like if it's right after a workout, like chocolate milk, I know has gotten some good press because that's essentially what we need. It's carbs and protein. It's already liquid, so it's super easy to digest. It's super quick, and it also has some sodium in it too. But if the further you get out, then we can have a little bit more of a normal meal at the 4 hour mark. I think if it's 4 hours post workout, then I would hope we've had a post workout shake or drink or something prior to that. But And then that's kind of like our second post-workout meal. Vitamins and minerals are going to be, I think the way to look at this is taking a vitamin is not going to make you a better athlete. It's not going to improve your performance. Taking additional, we'll say, we know that iron is good for, it's required for red blood cells. So to carry oxygen to your muscles, you have to have adequate stores of iron. Taking more iron is not going to make you better. But the thing with vitamins and minerals, the key thing to think about is a deficiency in any of them will cause you problems or cause you to impair performance. So I don't think I would say it's an ergogenic aid or it's a supplement that's going to make you faster. But for me, multivitamin is it's non-negotiable. Like, take a multivitamin. There's absolutely no reason not to, other than maybe it costs a couple dollars, maybe a little bit of an expense. But a good multivitamin just basically gives me an insurance policy that I'm not missing anything. Obviously, most of our nutrients I want to make sure I'm getting from food the way that nature made them. But multivitamin is just a no-brainer to make sure that we're not missing anything. And I would focus on making sure that we are taking a quality multivitamin. Sometimes people tell me, "Oh, I'm taking Flintstone multivitamins," or "I have a gummy multivitamin," and I'm like, "Well, that's fine, but that doesn't really count." Is what I tend to tell them. I wouldn't say if it's between Flintstones or nothing, then definitely go to Flintstones. But quality multivitamin, we're looking for a capsule, so something that I tend to stay away from tablets because they're bound together. But a capsule to where it's going to actually break open and we can absorb those nutrients individually. And then a little bit better brand. I mean, I really like the AM/PM multivitamin from Lifetime Fitness. And you don't have to be a member of Lifetime to get it. But I know like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, like a lot of these have an AM/PM version, but it's nice because the AM version is the nutrients we need to produce more energy production, and then like PM is some of the nutrients we need to get more deep restful sleep. The other side of it is I'm getting 2 shots throughout the day, of to be able to absorb these nutrients rather than just taking it in the morning. I know I'll take it with coffee. I mean, I know that coffee will bind some of those nutrients up. I'm not getting as good absorption, but I'm going to drink coffee in the morning, and that's just the way it is. So having AM/PM gives me 2 shots to just make sure we're optimizing absorption. And I think I do want to just kind of throw out there too that nutrition is really important. I think that it's the key to giving you the building blocks to do what you need. But essentially, the reason that I fell in love with the marathon and haven't been able to, I guess, kick the habit is because to me it's the only challenge that I know that basically takes everything I got, and really to me is proof of what I'm capable of. So I think it really does come down to mental strength and having a lot of heart. I think when it comes to nutrition, though, I want to use nutrition to make sure that when I get to the start line, I'm putting myself, and same thing with training. You can't say that, well, I'm just mentally tough and that's why I'm going to do well. There's a lot of mentally tough people who physically are just unable to do a marathon because it does take training, it does take discipline, and we want to use nutrition to support ourselves as well as we can to help us get to the start line and perform as well as we can in the race. If anyone is looking for like individual programs and stuff, we can definitely connect you with some more coaching and support. My email's on there, so shoot me an email. We do a $25 discount for anybody as long as you mention Kopf running, do a discount as well.
Thanks, Tom. And I would just really kind of piggyback on that, in that, whether you're training for, the full marathon, a half marathon, or even a 5K, from what I've seen over the years as a coach, nutrition is always kind of this gray area where people don't quite know what to do. A lot of the information that was covered in tonight's presentation, for most, I feel, is kind of foreign territory. So I would say that we all have our training. We're all off and started in our running. That if you're struggling with your nutrition and you feel like that's a piece where you can really fine tune some things to improve your performance and just generally feel better, then it's certainly worth reaching out to Tom and considering working with him one-on-one, as he has done with a lot of my clients over the years. So that 25% discount is going to be good through next Wednesday, June 25th. You can contact Tom directly, or you can email me and we can get you connected. It looks like, Tom, we have another question here from Sarah. She asked, can you give an example of what 30 grams of protein looks like at a meal? For example, breakfast, lunch, and or dinner.
Yes, that's a awesome question. Thank you for that. That's a great question. And I think 30 grams might sound like a lot, but if you think about an ounce of meat is about 7 grams of protein, and what you're looking at there is like 3 ounce serving of meat is like a deck of cards. So it's about the size of a deck of cards is 3 ounces. That would be about 21 grams of protein. So, and you will pick up a couple grams of protein from vegetables, like if you're having your vegetables on the side. Like a piece of bread has 3 grams of protein. So technically, or typically, if you're having like 3 to 4 ounces of meat with your meal, you're pretty well covered with the 30 grams. In the morning, if you're doing breakfast, is probably the most challenging, because typically, what's breakfast? We're looking at like cereal or oatmeal or something like a bagel, something like that. It's usually carb. Eggs obviously are going to be the best source of protein for a typical breakfast meal. An egg has 7 grams of protein. So if we're doing 3 eggs, we're at 21. If we put a little bit of cheese on there and maybe throw some veggies in and make like a scrambled, like a scrambled egg, an omelet, veggie omelet, we're sitting at 30 for breakfast, which is very untypical. Standard American diet is probably 10 grams of protein at breakfast, or maybe very little. It's also the point of the day that's the longest. It's the longest period of time between. If you think about, like, if you're, especially if you were working out in the afternoon, you had dinner, and then it's basically going to be about 20 hours until you have lunch. Having protein at breakfast is going to be huge. And especially if you're working out in the morning too, before breakfast, getting that 30 grams of protein at breakfast is going to be very important. Another just very efficient way to do it, a scoop of whey protein, a typical scoop of whey protein has 20 grams. So that's one reason that protein shakes are just really, there's nothing special about a protein shake. I know, like, sometimes people will look at that big tub of protein and be like, oh no, I don't want to bulk up, I'm not a bodybuilder. But look at one scoop of whey protein is basically 3 ounces of chicken. It's the same thing. It's just that it's a lot more convenient. So you can throw it in a shaker, throw some milk in, shake it up, and you can be, drinking that on the way out of the gym, versus you're never going to be gnawing on a chicken breast on the way back to your car, right? So, protein shake is an efficient way to get that. 4 ounces of meat, or like 3 eggs. And then I got another one on Gatorade during training. Yeah, it's still effective. I mean, there's a reason that it's concentrated the way that it is. That being said, if it bothers your stomach and diluting it a little bit doesn't, then great. I mean, that's obviously better. I would much rather have you at 3% carbohydrate solution and feeling good than 7% concentration and having a sore stomach. So you can definitely water the Gatorade down. I might suggest like the what's the G2. So the G2 has half of the carbohydrates, but it still has the same amount of sodium. So that might be a little bit better than just watering Gatorade down. But I think definitely goes back to what works for you. So I would try Gatorade on a long run. Try it watered down, and if you feel significantly better, then for sure I think what you're feeling is definitely going to trump anything that I'm suggesting.
Awesome.
2 hours after a run, carb and protein. Think about breakfast. Breakfast foods tend to be a little bit higher carbohydrates. Post workout, we're looking for some higher carbohydrate meals that also include some protein. So, like a bowl of cereal, and a couple hours after a run is definitely not a bad option because it's a little bit higher carbohydrates than a normal meal. But it's kind of simple and efficient, and then the milk will give you a little bit of protein. But I would go back to also like the 30 grams of protein rule. So like a protein shake is going to be another just simple, efficient way of getting that, or just like some chicken breast with chicken breast and a sweet potato, or a little bit of meat and a sweet potato is going to give you some carbohydrates and protein. Even substituting that for maybe like some pasta and a pasta and chicken, or something like that as well.
Thank you, Amy and Missy, for the questions. So do we have any final questions or comments before we end tonight's webinar? So I just want to say a special thank you again to Tom for taking time out of his busy schedule. Tom is not only a registered dietitian working with athletes and everyday folks, but also is the owner of one of the fastest growing timing companies, race timing companies in the country. And so now is an incredibly busy time for him. So we really feel fortunate to have him. And I think we have one more question that's getting squeezed in here, Angie. So Angie asks, how do you evaluate why you feel fatigue? How do you evaluate why you feel fatigue?
Boy, that is a good one. That is a very complex thing. Fatigue is one of the most challenging things for doctors. When people say, I feel fatigued, a doctor's like, oh shoot, because it can come from so many different angles. I would say the thing I will always say, number one, I'm always going to start with hydration. The first question I'm always going to ask is, are you properly hydrated? One of the quickest ways to feel fatigue is to get dehydrated. And then if somebody says yes, the next question I'm gonna think about is I'm gonna think about blood sugar. So, are your blood sugars stabilized? So somebody, I also work as a personal trainer. So let's say I'm working with somebody at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're fatigued. I'm like, well, are you hydrated? Yeah, I've been drinking water all day. Okay, what'd you have to eat today? And they're like, well, I had a bagel for breakfast, and then I didn't really get lunch today. And I'll give them a absolute crazy look. I'm like, really? Like 3 o'clock in the afternoon? But we definitely want to make sure that blood sugars are stabilized. So I look back. Have you had a meal in the last 3 hours? Yes. I had a Big Mac and large fries. I'm like, okay, well, your blood sugar's low because you're in a food coma because you're reacting to that. So taking a look at their blood sugars, if they're stabilizing their blood sugars with small, frequent meals. And then I guess for me, and of course I'm looking at the nutrition side of this. So number 3 for me is going to be the micronutrients. So are they getting adequate iron and B vitamins? Are they on a multivitamin? Is there any nutrient deficiencies we could be looking at? But past that, also there's definitely a host of things. I mean, there could be some medical stuff going on. They could have some insulin resistance. So I definitely would say if you've hit in bases 1, 2, 3, and obvious number 4 that I didn't mention is sleep. sleep is very undervalued. I think people think that, oh, I'm fine, I get my 6 hours or whatever. 6 hours is probably fine to hang on, if you're not under any undue stress. Anyone training for a marathon is under undue stress. So we absolutely need more sleep than a lot of our sedentary counterparts, because we're breaking down tissues. We have to regenerate tissues, and the only time throughout the day where we actually during sleep, every process in the body slows down except for one, which is cell regeneration. So that's why we need more sleep. That's why kids sleep for 14 hours a day, is because they're just generating a tremendous amount of cells because they're growing. The older we get, we tend to stop growing and actually start degenerating at a certain age. So we don't need as much sleep because we're not building as many cells, unless we're doing something traumatizing like endurance activities that last 3 or 4 hours, in which case we definitely need that sleep. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of got off a little bit on a tangent there. I do want to hit the gluten-free question here too. If someone's gluten-free, does gluten-free bread still work toward carbs the same way as regular bread does? Gluten-free pasta, and that sort of thing? Yes, absolutely. So a carbohydrate, so we can get carbohydrates from a number of different grains, and there's a little bit more simple, like white flours and things like that. But you have quinoa, rice, corn, pasta. Basically, from a nutrient standpoint, all the same. Like it's carbohydrates that we're breaking down. The one difference with gluten is that the protein that's in wheat is very challenging for some people to break down, and they actually physically can't break it down. So that's where it causes them a lot of problems. But they tend to be totally fine with other substitutes. So just think of like gluten-free bread as it's basically the same thing. It just doesn't have that protein, that gluten protein in it.
That's a great question, Brandy. And I'm sure those who are on the webinar tonight, who are going to be listening at a later time, have a gluten allergy concern. So asking that question not only helped yourself, but I'm sure it's going to help others too. So I think that's a really great question. And with that, Tom, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. I want to thank everyone for jumping on tonight's webinar, and thank you to those who are going to be listening in the future. Tom, thanks again so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise. And again, if anybody has any questions and want to look a little bit deeper or dive a little bit deeper into their nutrition and work with Tom in a more in-depth manner, please feel free. And I encourage you to reach out to Tom. His email is included there, or simply just email me and I can get you connected to Tom. But with that said, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tom. And best of luck out there on the roads and the trails as you put your miles in. All right, guys, have a great night.
Thanks.